Welcome to Positive Filter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls and people. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Filter. I'm joined by a special guest. Well, everyone's a special guest because they take their time to join me on our show. I'm joined by keynote speaker, a communication coach, consultant, guru, whatever you want to insert, podcaster like me, native DMVer, Sarah Elkin. Now, we connected on LinkedIn. I think she saw the connections that her mom is a Mason alum. Shout out to the Mason alum, Mason Nation. But we had that connection, I guess, through that. And we were like, let's do a collaboration and episode together. And we're going to go ahead and do it. But before we get started and the topic that we're discussing today, Sarah, can you just give the listeners a little bit of a background on who you are?
Sure, absolutely. So I am a storyteller, and I've performed as a storyteller. I'm also a musician. And I worked for government agencies for roughly 20 years. One of the things I realized pretty early on was that miscommunication was really the reason most people hated their jobs. And it was so miserable for some people. I saw so much turnover. And the saddest thing was that they were people that were really good at what they did. And it was all because they would be miscommunicating with their bosses and with their colleagues. So as soon as I noticed that, I started training people just as a sub job, and sometimes within the same organization. I would train people. Like when I worked for a city, I did customer service workshops with some of the other departments. And then I hit my limit on the miscommunication, and I couldn't fix it from inside anymore. So I went solo. And shortly after I left my last government job, I was certified with Gallup with the StrengthsFinder tool. And I found that to be an absolute game changer when it comes to communication. And the way that I implement that is I say your strengths are your stories. And we talk about with one-on-one clients or with team clients, because I work with a lot of government agencies and nonprofits. We talk a lot about how to demonstrate your values and demonstrate your natural talents through the stories that you share.
I love that. I'm just going to go on a guess. I want you to real quickly guess what my top 5 strengths are, because I love it. I'm also strength certified. I think it's one of the best assessments and thriving. And I'm going to try to guess what yours are. So let me guess yours. I know communication's in there, right? And yours.
It's not in my top 5, but it's definitely my top 10 or 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was my guess. That you just crushed me. I was thinking maybe how about context? How about context or ideation?
I have ideation.
Okay,
yep,
at least
ideation's number 3.
Okay, I got one. Okay, guess a couple for mine.
You must have Achiever in there.
That's Achiever. That's top 10. What do you think? And then would this be a surprise that my number 1 is Woo?
No, that's not a surprise at all. It's my number 6.
So I love it. So,
and for our listeners, Woo is winning others over, and this is somebody who's super charming, who just there's this magical way that they get everybody around them to feel like they're seen and heard, just almost instantaneously. That's the beauty and power of Woo.
Oh, I thought it was just because I was outgoing. I don't know, but thank you. So. You talked about, miscommunication and the art of storytelling, which I think is going to be the central focus of our episode, because, storytelling is such a powerful tool, particularly for interviewing and stuff. We can talk about that later on. But when you were seeing these levels of communication breakdowns, there's so many different modes: written, body language, how you speak. Were you like categorizing it when you're helping people, you're coaching internally, and then when you wanted to branch out on your solo venture as a communications person, what lane did you really like to gravitate to? How people talk to each other, how people write to each other? What was your go-to mode of coaching?
Well, I have Woo as number 6, and I'm guessing it was much higher in my younger years. And so it was definitely the face-to-face miscommunications that I saw at first. But then, of course, over the years, everything shifted to video and text and email. And I noticed a distinct change in relationships when people didn't understand tone in writing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was huge. And I still have a hard time. One of my sons, my older son, who's 23, sometimes just doesn't respond to a text if I don't ask a direct question. Like he's just assuming that I don't need a response if I'm not asking him a question. No confirmation thumbs up icon or anything like that. No emojis. And so I noticed pretty early on that there are two different ways that people speak in their writing. Some write exactly the way they speak. And I call those the people who speak in full sentences, and they write in full sentences. And then you have the ones that are very direct, and those are the ones that write in bullet points. And what would happen is somebody who needs the relationship interactions. So somebody in StrengthsFinder, it would be people who are more in the influencing and relationship building domain. When they'd receive an email that was all in bullet points without a, hey, how are you doing? How was your weekend? They would immediately assume the person was angry with them, or something had gone wrong, or they were in a bad mood. And that's not at all what was happening. That's just how they speak. And so that's how they write. So that was a big part. Or somebody who was wordy, who would write out full sentences, somebody with context in their top talents, that likes to write the full story of what they're explaining. They'd send that off to somebody who speaks in bullet points, and the person speaking in bullet points would just dismiss it. It was too much. It wasn't in their language. And sometimes they would just dismiss it. And then they're left with this disconnect where the person who writes in the full sentences, again, is wondering what they did wrong. And the person who writes in bullet points isn't even reading this message. They might skim over the first sentence or two sentences, and then they respond without having read the whole thing. And they've missed the whole point of the conversation. And so many times that ends up causing real issues internally and with external stakeholders.
Wow, that's very interesting. I mean, I definitely have learned over time about email etiquette and, text language. And I shoot from the hip. I'm like, I don't have time. I definitely love people. And I think I like to, I definitely didn't interpret someone's short emails as abrasive. I just thought like, we're getting straight to business, but then I've learned context, using the correct salutations, hello, dear, good morning, rather than going straight to the point. So with this, and you're building this idea, and this is a really helpful tool. When did you realize the importance of that story narrative in regards to communication, where you're like, wow, storytelling is also a really maybe underutilized strength, or that this is something that people are not really utilizing to their full capacity for you in your journey of coaching people?
Well, it really started when I was trying to do these customer service workshops. And I noticed that when I would just say, do this, don't do that it really didn't resonate with people. But when I told a story of an experience I had, a very specific, when I was working at a restaurant and these people came in and this is what happened. And I came to the conclusion when I was doing customer service work that if you really want good customer service, you have to be a good customer. So all of my trainings, when I would do these workshops and sessions, were based on that premise. I would tell a story of where I had experienced good customer service or bad, and how I had given or given good service or bad. And then I would have them share stories about what was good and what was bad about their customer experiences. And once the story sharing started, people started to really engage because they had something that was familiar, that they had all experienced, that there was something very mutual, very much in common among them. And that's where I started to really see people light up. And I remember when I was first coaching as a side hustle, before I left my government job, I was coaching, and one woman told me at least 3 times that she was smart. We're having this discussion. She's like, well, I'm smart. And at the end, I said, I'm not sure if you're trying to convince me or yourself by saying that so many times. So instead of saying, I'm smart, tell me a story that demonstrates how smart you are. And that has to include other characters. It can't be all about you, because that doesn't resonate with anybody. But tell me a story about when you did something really smart, that you were really satisfied with how things came out. And she did. And I just looked at her. I said, you don't have to tell anyone you're smart. Just tell them that story.
So, wow. I mean, that's definitely a mic drop right there. So what would be the key components of a good story? Like if we're going to, break down the art of storytelling, which, is Outkast song. I love that song. Yeah. Have you heard of that art of storytelling by Outkast?
Oh, yeah, I love that song. That's
So,
a good one.
But the art of storytelling, how would you break down a story? What's the good components of a well-crafted story?
Well, I already said, I mentioned one, which is including other characters. And I always try to start with a location. Where were you sitting? What was the environment around you? Even if it's just 3 words, I was in my office, or I was in my car, or standing in line at Costco. Starting with that location that puts the listener in that place with you, so they feel like they're standing beside you or sitting beside you. I always start with that. I always make sure I include other characters. And sometimes they're really good characters, the mentor style characters, the guides. And sometimes they're the characters that inspired you to do something to spite them or in spite of them. Sometimes those characters are great too, as long as you are describing them as an observation and not as value and judgmental. Because
so not like vilifying them. So
exactly.
So you could say, like, I mean, I got stories, honestly, I'm going back to, like, those overcoming stories, like a teacher that told me I couldn't do nothing, and I did it, and I kind of chip on my shoulder. How do I tell that story without vilifying the teacher?
Well, you can say that the teacher was obviously burned out or had been working in a place where kids really didn't care. And so she or he was demonstrating that burnout.
So you try to put yourself in that person's shoes, empathize, still not excuse the behavior, but don't vilify.
Exactly. I talk about a boss who was really pretty abusive to me. And I still struggle once in a while. It was years ago, and I still struggle once in a while when I think of her. I feel that flush come up, And it was because she was in a hard position at that time. And you need to see every character from 3 dimensions. You can't just look at them as a caricature, because there's the common line. You don't know what that person's going through at home. You don't know what kind of childhood trauma they experienced to behave that way. There's never an excuse for the bullying. And I think of your teacher and I just want to slap her, right? Like there's no excuse for that behavior. At the same time, if you don't make that character 3-dimensional, it doesn't make you look good. So think about it from that perspective. If you're bad-mouthing your ex-girlfriend or whatever to a new girlfriend, that's not going to make you look good. She's not going to go, oh, yeah, you're so right. She sounds like a horrible person, right? She's going to think, is he going to be talking about me like that in the future if we break up?
Yeah.
So you really need to think about how you are coming across when you describe another character in your story. And
I was about to say we got location and we got characters. What's another component? I'm sorry.
I think one of the things that most people miss is how important it is to be a story listener. So watching a person's body language and expressions as you're sharing a story, so you can see whether you're stepping in it with them. And what I find is you can't backpedal. Once you've stepped into something with somebody, you can't really backpedal. But what you can say is, I think I might have said something that insulted you. Or I'm going on too long. I can see that I've been yammering. Sorry, I've been alone all day at home in my office, and I'm just yammering. How are you? What's going on with you? How's your kid? being able to take that step back when you notice that the body language is shifting away from you, their expression has shifted. Being a good story listener means that you are going to make a much more intentional impact when you share your story. And the last part I'll add here, because I could go on and on about storytelling, the last thing I'll add here is having an intention when you're sharing a story. So when I talked about my coaching client who kept telling me she was smart, I said, if your intention is to demonstrate your intelligence, then tell a story that does just that. If your intention is to entertain me, tell a story that does that. But if you go into it with an intention, it helps relieve that burden of being sensitive about, am I sharing too much information? Am I sharing not enough information? Am I going on too long? Am I going too detailed? Am I not adding enough details? You stop thinking in those terms and you can come right back to center if you know what your intention is in sharing a story.
I love it. So it's almost like, I'm in Toastmasters, and you always prepare for speeches ahead of time. So like you would say, okay, what is the real audience? What am I trying, my intention? And then you kind of reverse engineer and build a story around it. So like you said, for this instance, her intentions was like, I want to display my intelligence. And maybe in this situation, she'll also look like, I want to display my intelligence at an interview with other scientists. So then I need to know the intention is displaying my intelligence. The audience is the scientist. So now I need to take you through a story where it's like, they know the lingo, they know the terms, that would be like, wow, that does display intelligence. And I know that intention, I'm nailing it. So what would you say to someone, about incorporating storytelling and into an interview? Like, cause in an interview, or not know, but like, like you don't have everyone's time. You don't have, they're going to say, tell me a time you did this, tell me a time you did X. So how can you really be a really good storyteller in an interview, but like, as you said, not ramble and be to the point?
That is a great question. And I'm just going to share a story of how I do that with my coaching clients. I recently had a coaching client who was looking to move up. She wanted a switch in position. She wanted to move away from where she was living to another city. She had like this dream job idea. And we together created what I call a story portfolio. And we had categories of what the stories needed to demonstrate. And then, so across the top of a spreadsheet, we had categories like demonstrates resilience, demonstrates team player, demonstrates leadership. And of course, there's a lot of crossover here. So one story can demonstrate all of those things. Demonstrates competence in HR functions, specific HR functions. And demonstrates adaptability and flexibility, all those things that you have to know about yourself. If you're not flexible and adaptable, don't list that as a category, right? Like really be honest with yourself, because you don't want to end up in a job that doesn't fit your strengths. Like I'm not going to be an accountant. I'm not going to be in a position that has a lot of maintenance. Because I have adaptability and activator in my top talent. So I have to be moving. I have to take new steps. I need to meet new people. So I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to use one of those categories, not maintenance, procedures, processes. Like I'm not going to demonstrate those. I could, but that's not what I want to be doing. And then on the left side of that same spreadsheet, we have specifics so that we remember to be specific in our stories. So client 1, client 2, mentor, good boss, bad boss, all those, I guess.
It's kind of like those characters you told me. You built out the characters.
Yeah, exactly. Travel, project A, project B, and then telling a story within those specific themes. And you don't have to write out the whole story. Just write out a phrase or a couple sentences so you remember what happened, so that anytime somebody asks you a question, you can generally predict what's going to be asked in an interview for a job, right? We have a whole list. You Google job interview questions, project manager, IT, and all of the interview questions possible are going to come up. And even if you just look at the job description, and the qualities they're looking for, you know exactly what the categories need to be. And you start filling in stories that demonstrate those particular characteristics so that you have them ready when you're interviewed. You don't have to think on your feet, oh, what story do I have about that? You know, you already have it jotted down so the memory is clear. And I think it's really important when it comes to people who have to think for longer periods of time before they speak. You know who I'm talking about in StrengthsFinder: people with context, people with responsibility, people with focus and consistency. They want to be far more prepared than you and I need to be. So if that's the case, practice those stories. Look in the mirror, talk to your dog, tell the story to your baby or your teenager, and try to keep it to 3 to 5 minutes.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And in those stories, you really pick out 3 key points. You pick out the beginning, which describes the location. You pick out the characters that you want to tell, the obstacle that you met, and how you overcame the obstacle.
I love it. Now, what is your thought? Because I believe I'm funny. I think I am. Whatever. If not, but what what is the appropriateness, particularly in storytelling? Right, the best storytellers are pretty funny. I think that's all comedians. They tell really good stories. But what about the infusion of humor in a job interview? Is that a no-go? Because particularly in stories, I got some really funny stories that do show like real strengths, but they got a little bit of jokes in them. So what would your thoughts be on that, about the appropriateness of humor in your storytelling, but in an interview?
I am a big believer in humor in an interview. Absolutely. I've been known to add in a Monty Python quote periodically in an interview. I wouldn't use language that isn't expected. If you're interviewing with musicians, like, you know, you're going for an audition to join a band, then, you know, all bets are off as far as your language. But if you're interviewing at a corporation, a nonprofit, you know, watching your language, adding that doesn't add humor. Yeah. But humor, absolutely. And I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I was interviewing for a position with a university, and they asked me how I handled a critical incident at work. How do you handle a critical incident at work? And I looked at them and I kind of smiled and I said, critical incident? I'm in a higher ed. Critical is a heart attack. And while I take my work very seriously, nothing in higher ed is truly a critical incident. And the first thing I have to know is that there is an answer to it. And then I told a story about how I handled a very difficult situation. I was facilitating a meeting, and there was one person who was really not just resistant, but almost hostile. And I told the story of how I handled that. But starting with critical, I'm not a doctor. It's not a heart attack that I'm dealing with. So adding that little bit of humor, I think, is important because it demonstrates that you take your work seriously, but you don't take yourself seriously.
I love that. I love that. And definitely appropriate language. So we can't be going into interviews talking like Red Fox or Martin Lawrence, you know, or Eddie Murphy Raw uncut. But
now I would enjoy that.
we could do the PG version with the humor and the jokes, but at least still bring it into the storytelling. You know, I always thought about this too, in regards to it is, you know, when you tell a good story, you try to hit their mind and their heart, right? Their heart with their emotional response and the feelings, but then their mind with the logic. So how important is it, you know, like Spock or whatever, to hit them with logic and numbers in your storytelling? Because, you know, I think, you know, when you make this graph, you know, when you made that T-chart or whatever, you know, also numbers don't lie. So is it really important when you're telling stories to like quantify things, or does it, you know, is that overthinking it or too much overkill?
Well, really, it depends on the audience. It depends on why you're telling your story. If you're doing a TED Talk on a particular scientific topic, absolutely, you have to include some data, because as much as people love stories, you want to make it. We have far too many people believing things without seeing the data right now, more than ever before in our history. So by all means, show the proof. when you're talking about what you did in terms of an interview, and you're telling a story of a project, you can say, I saved the company $2.5 million by implementing this tool. Absolutely. I wouldn't get into the weeds with it, but you can say, if you'd like more information about that, I can show you the data that backs this up. Or the data is in my resume. I have the very specific numbers in my resume, so I'm not going to talk about that. What I'm going to talk about was how I did it. Acknowledge that it says in my resume, I increased sales by 12% in 6 months, right?
So you give yourself an out, you could say approximately and all that, and then back it up later. And when you have an opportunity to gather yourself and not feel, because I feel like you would be spotlighted to be exact, in that moment. And
well, you can say those numbers in my resume, right?
Yeah, the story wouldn't flow if you feel like, oh, I'm going to get the number wrong or something.
Right, right. And people don't listen to the numbers, they see them. You're going to be far more effective if you have a chart than if you're using language, right? You can't see data as much as you can't hear data as much as you can see it. So you can describe a chart or something much better than just, saying these are the numbers, because people don't remember numbers specifically. Unless you say, I increased sales by 150% in 2 weeks, then they're going to hear that because it's pretty dramatic. But you mentioned also touching the heart of your audience. And I can tell you, there have been so many stories that I've shared where I see people, touch their chest as I'm speaking because they're feeling what I'm saying. And then the next thing, they're hugely laughing or smiling or looking at each other and cracking up. So being able to do both is great. Again, I'm going to back up a little. If that's not your style, if that doesn't feel right to you, then you need to rethink anything that you're going to say if it doesn't feel right to you. I'm a big believer in stepping out of your comfort zone and practicing humor, because humor really connects people. And at the same time, making sure that it fits the brand that you want to be demonstrating. If you don't want to demonstrate you're a comedian, then cut out the jokes, right?
Okay, but here's but what if you are like, that is your go-to style, but then you want to be taken too seriously, but then you don't want to be like a robot. So like, how do you tone down it? Or for instance, I love that your measuring stick. How do you assess your storytelling style before you go, like, I'm more on the humor side, I'm more on the just get it done to business. Like, how would someone evaluate their storytelling style before they kind of craft it?
Well, there are a couple things I highly recommend when you're starting out on this idea of becoming a better storyteller. Everyone needs to be a better storyteller. Every scientist needs to be a better storyteller. Doesn't matter who you are. What I always recommend is watching other people tell stories. You have to observe as many people as you can. Watch TED Talks. Watch people speak. Listen to Simon Sinek. Listen to, I have a whole bunch of episodes of my podcast with scientists telling stories. Listen to them. Watch them. See what resonates with you and see what doesn't resonate with you. And after you've kind of identified how you like a story to be told and how it resonates, then ask your friends, what kind of storyteller am I? Am I a good storyteller? Where do I need to improve in my storytelling? Because guaranteed, don't ask your siblings, because they're going to be super hard on you. They're going to be super critical. They're going to have all of the inside knowledge that will make you too sensitive. But ask people that already love you and appreciate you, and they'll tell you what kind of storyteller you are and where it feels most organic when you're telling a story.
I think also, I believe I'm a good storyteller because most times the most random things happen to me. So, and then my wife is a really good storyteller because she's actually, I think she knows how to like take you through a journey and then like land the plane, and everyone's like, they love her. My wife's really good at telling stories. So what would be examples of a really bad storyteller? I got some good ones, but what would be, like that person needs some work. So what would be some red flags, the red flags of storytelling?
Well, the first one is somebody who is just yammering, telling the story, and isn't even paying attention that no one else is listening. That's a big key indicator. Is if I do this at restaurants sometimes, I'll be sitting there listening. I have this keen hearing because I used to work in restaurants for almost 15 years. I waited tables, I cocktailed, I managed shifts, whatever I had to do to get through college and those first couple of years after college. And I remember, I still do this. I'll be sitting there listening to other people's conversations. And when I hear one person talking through the entire dinner or lunch, and I rarely hear the voice of the other person at the table, I know that person is not a good storyteller. They're not a good listener. This is somebody who is telling stories to hear their own voice. And that's the worst. I mean, I find it so important that when you're telling a story, the intention is to unlock the stories of the people around you. So when you're in an interview and you share a really good story about a project you completed and how it felt at the end and the success and the obstacles, you can see the people at the table nodding their heads. They're like, oh my gosh, that reminds me of the time that I did, or that boss that was so bad, or, you can see them nodding. So that's the first one, is the person who is just yammering. And another thing that sometimes is off-putting is when somebody is trying to be funny and they're really tone deaf about their audience, right? You're like, oh yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, like the mic's on and no one's laughing at the jokes, man. That crickets, yeah.
Right. And again, it's that awareness of your audience and the observation of how your story is being taken. And some people are just completely oblivious. I heard my sister, this was brilliant, when some guy told a story. She lives in Northern California. Some guy at work, when she worked at a beverage company, told a story that was racist. And my sister, oh my gosh, she was so angry. But she knew that if she just lashed out at him, it wouldn't be a lesson. Because she's this small white Jewish woman. And if she lashes out at him, it's just going to dig in his heels, right? So she very calmly said, I don't understand. What do you mean by that? Totally took the pressure, and put it right back on him. Everyone else is feeling that anxiety of, oh my God, I can't believe he just said that. My sister's like, what do you mean by that? I'm confused. Can you explain that? And then all of a sudden he had to really think about what he had just said. And he said, oh, you just don't get it. And he walked away. But guaranteed that made him stop and think about what he was sharing, the audience he was sharing with, and how that went wrong. Guaranteed, even if he's not self-reflective, I guarantee he walked away feeling really uncomfortable.
Yes. So what would be, okay, can you pivot and know that, oh, this story is going bad, this story is going, oh, you did say that earlier. Mm-hmm. You can check in with your listener and be like, oh, this story is going bad. Did I say something wrong or something? You could check in and you could pivot and can you recover a story?
That's a good question, Phil. I've really messed up over the years on that. It's really hard to recover a story. What you can do is acknowledge that you did something wrong. And to me, that is so much more inspiring, is to hear somebody say, whoa, I took that in the wrong direction. Let's back up a little. Let me try that again, right? And if they laugh, great. If not, maybe call it quits.
I was about to say, okay, yeah. Just
cut
your loss. Cut your L. Take your L. Okay.
Exactly.
I was about to say, there's no point to be like, okay, I still got to finish the story. And you're like, why? At this point, just stop. Okay, good point.
Exactly. And I used to totally dig in my heels and just want to finish it. And I found myself digging a deeper and deeper hole that's harder and harder to get out of. So just cut your losses. You don't have to finish that story.
There you go. I love that, because I thought about that too. It's like, well, sometimes people just want to finish it. And you're like, at what point that person, you lost the audience, they're not listening. It lost its power, its intention or impact. So pivot. change subjects.
Exactly. And ask a question. What I find really has been working for me, and I'm telling you, I'm not perfect at this by any stretch, but what happens is when I notice that I'm going that way, I stop myself and I ask them a very specific question. Did that happen to you at some point? Or do you remember a time when, or what happened yesterday when you said ABC? Just turning it around and asking, if you ask a basic question like, how are you? Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't been paying attention to you. How are you doing? They're just going to say fine and they're going to walk away. And you haven't retrieved that relationship in any way. So if you ask them something specific like, hey, last time we talked, you said your older son just won a soccer tournament. So how did that go? Is he still celebrating? What's going on? Last time we talked, you said you were going to go travel. Did that actually happen? How was the trip? Be specific so that it generates that feeling of goodwill again, because they're sharing something good, a story that made them feel good. That way you can end it on a better note.
I love that. So is there a power to, I guess, is that called a technique, like call and response? I'd be seeing that in, call and response, like put your hand up, kind of like in the audience. Is that part of a storytelling thing to kind of check in periodically with the audience? Like, are y'all good? Like the call and response and making sure you get in there. You're trying to solicit a response from your listener to continue that engagement so that it doesn't just drop off.
Exactly. In a one-to-one, that's what works for sure. In a bigger audience, I think the most important thing when you're sharing a story is whether it's the whole group that seems off-put or just a couple people. Because if it's just a couple people, focus on those people that are your people. They're already engaged. Don't try to change the minds of the two people in the back that you insulted. It's not going to happen. So focus on the people that you really want to have a positive impact on. And sometimes those other people will come along for the ride. Sometimes they won't. And that's just the way it is. Not everybody's going to like you. Your message isn't going to resonate with every single person. So there are times where you just have to focus on the people that are your people. They're already in, they're engaged, they want to learn from you. Focus on those. Ignore the guy behind the curtain, right?
I love it. Well, I think we can go on and on, but I think want to respect your time. And also, you're giving out this free advice. I know that you're doing coaching. So, hey, I'm not going to try to get you, I want you to have some clients out there. So you can't give all the secrets for storytelling on this episode. But we're at the part of the show called Shot for Shot. You get to share ask me a random question. I ask you a random question. You want to go first? I'll go first.
I'll go first.
Okay.
What made you decide to start a podcast?
See, I love it. I love it. And this is going to be the story. You're going to make me practice my storytelling. So location wise. So this was nearly 5 years ago. So April 2017. I was sitting in my car and I was bored going into a job that wasn't as fulfilling. And what I was doing was I was saying, I need something to kind of get me motivated. So I started doing YouTube videos in my car where I would like set up my car cell phone. I would do like these little, what I called random ramblings of Philip Wilkerson, which are still on YouTube. And I would talk, just say, hey, happy Monday, y'all. Just want to come on here real quick and talk about dreams and goal setting. I was just doing it for myself, but talking out loud. Then I realized that was pretty boring because I was just sitting in a car. There was these are boring YouTube videos, like the same, like it was like Groundhog Day. So I was like, man, I like the story. I like connecting. I like talking, but no one needs to see me just sitting in my car. That's pretty boring. So let me figure out a way to do this. Like I heard, this was like 5 years ago when I just heard about podcasts. Like I heard this thing like radio show called podcast where you make your own radio show. So I reached out to my friend. His name is Sam Nang. I said, Sam Nang, I heard your boy does this because I knew one of his friends did it. Can you connect me with him so I can ask him questions about how to start a podcast? And he connected me with my friend Dean Picari, who, his mentor, I call him my podcast mentor. And he didn't know me from Timbuktu, but because it was my friend Sam Nang, he talked to me for 2 hours about how to start a podcast. He gave me all the tips. He sent me, we were looking it up on the computer. He legit dumped everything on me. And I was like, that's it. And so I recorded my first episode in December of 2016. And I did not release an episode of the podcast till April 2017 because I was so
Wow.
nervous about how my voice sounded and no one's going to like it and all that stuff, which is so weird because it's such a distant memory right now. But like, I sat on that and that was it, man. I was just like, I just wanted to talk and get myself motivated, honestly. And so I was using the things that you talked about. I was doing listening to TED Talks and all that. So a lot of the themes, that's why it's called Positive Filter. A lot of the themes was about motivation. I was trying to honestly get myself motivated. And
Mhm.
uh, then I realized it was better to have guests like you rather than me just talk by myself. And, it's been a great ride ever since. It's been a great way for me to learn. So that's how I started a podcast. It's kind of random, honestly.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect. I love it because I was imagining you in your car, just
Yeah, I
like
literally put on all
psyching
this.
yourself up to go to work to a job you didn't really like. I totally get that. I tell my coaching clients, get some theme songs. You got to have some anthems that help you get going. So like mine is I feel good. Da-na-na-na-na-na. I knew that I would. So I have to totally psych myself up sometimes. That's a song I play.
Yeah, well, I love it. And I always hated the sound of my own voice, which is so weird. And, you know, I, me and my dad both have very raspy voices. And I don't know, it's like weird how like you had this perception like that you don't like this or you won't do it. But this one woman was like, I listen to your podcast and your voice is so soothing. I was like, no, it's not. I sound like I smoke menthol cigarettes. You know what I'm saying? I had this, normal grass. But she was like, that's a rasp. That's you. So it's just so interesting about these creative projects that people put off because they have this preconceived notion of how the world's going to view it. And then you just share it, sharing, these stories and stuff, and it built connections like we're doing now. Like I would never have these connections without the podcast. So I'm glad that random has played out in that situation.
Me too.
All right. So my question for you is that yeah, you made quite a leap from the DMV to Montana. So sell me. You are a travel agent. You're doing the elevator pitch for those little commercials like visit Montana. I want you to do one of those for us because I've always wanted to go visit. I've never been to Montana before. So when I do come out there someday on my speaking tour or whatever, something happens to me, I'm gonna stop by in Montana and chop it up with you. But sell me on Montana. Do the commercial for Montana.
All right. All right. Well, I have to tell you, I didn't have any idea about Montana when we moved here. I had lived in Colorado for a few years and thought it would be very similar. It's not. It's not like Colorado. So we moved from Washington, D.C. to Helena, Montana with a 6-month-old baby, driving across the country in a Ryder truck with a big car trailer and our little Honda with like 180,000 miles on it. And the dog and the cat camped out in the car all the way across the country. And I have to tell you, when we first got here, I wasn't so excited about it. It was kind of hard. People can be kind of cliquey. People have lived here their whole lives, generations of Montanans. And it's only been in the last 15 years or so that we've had an influx of people from other places that make it a better community for me. I can tell you that I never considered myself outdoorsy. I was like, I'm a city girl. I like to go, to museums and wander around. What I didn't realize until just recently is that I was always outside more than I was inside, even when I was in the city. When I moved to DC, I'd wander around the neighborhoods. It's not like I was getting in my car and being inside at malls. I hate malls, by the way. I don't go shopping like that. But so we moved to Montana, and I would hike all summer long with the baby in the backpack. And I could literally leave my house. We bought the house that we're in now, a year after we moved to Montana. And we are 2 blocks away from one of the largest natural city parks in the country. So I walk up 2 blocks. I was just on the mountain today. There was snow on the ground. It was pretty cold, but I learned that if I have the right gear, outdoors is magical. So I love to go up 2 blocks up my alley, and I am on these amazing trails full of deer and all kinds of critters. There are times we were just in a place where we saw elk roaming around, and you have to be aware because there are mountain lions on our mountain, right? So you don't want to be out there with a a little dog yipping if there's a mountain lion around. But there's this amazing sense of peace here. When I'm on that mountain, I hardly ever see anyone else up there, even though it's a really busy mountain. 500 to 1,000 people are on it every day. But it's so big, and there's so many trails that I rarely run into other people, especially in the winter. And I'll get up to any part of the mountain that's on the backside, on the west side of the mountain, and not see any buildings. It bumps right up to BLM and Forest Service land. And I get up there and the views are just spectacular. And the sky is the bluest sky you will ever see, especially in wintertime when it's reflecting off of the white snow on the ground. And it's so still sometimes, you can just feel yourself in a different place in the universe. It's just, I don't know that I can really express it the way that it feels when I'm up on those mountains and just exploring, mostly by myself or with my dog. And there's a sense of peace about it. So as much as I have ambitions to grow my business, I don't want to hire myself. I like my schedule where I can take a 2-hour hike in the middle of the day and not have to worry. Now I come back, I might work till 7 or 8 o'clock at night, but that's fine because I have these 2 hours where I'm totally inspired by nature and my dog.
Sheesh. I really listened to that whole story, and I was like, man, like I had 2 catchphrases. It was one that like, outdoors is magical, and Montana is not Colorado. Like, tagline: outdoors is magical. This is not Colorado. Brought to you by Montana.
And I love Colorado, but my gosh, Montana.
Come visit. I mean, I definitely got to come visit, man. I think one of my things was to visit all 50 states. And, that just sounded really, man, nature. I like outdoors too. And you spoke to that well-being piece too about just walking around in awe. That, that definitely inspires people, but it's also something that's good for well-being, just getting out in nature and seeing stuff. So
come see me, Phil.
Huh?
Come see me.
I got to. Hey, when I get this speaking tour someday, when, people pay me to come visit places, I'm coming to Helena, Montana. I'm going to be out there. That's going to be my Western tour. That's what I'm going to call it.
Wow, you'll be welcome. I'll cook for you.
I'll take it. I love food. So we are at the part of the show. This has been a great episode. We're at the part of the show we call shout outs and plugs. So with that, you can shout out, show love to anyone you want to show love to, anyone. And then plugs are directly how people can get in contact with you and things that you're working on, which, obviously I include in the show notes. So this is for you, shout outs and plugs.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. My first shout out is to my husband. Our 25th anniversary is coming up in May. And this was the 5th year of my No Longer Virtual Summit, which I created in February of 2017. Our first one was at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Atlanta. And it was a result of connecting so deeply and with people on LinkedIn. And I just wanted to meet them face to face. I thought, if I'm learning this much from them, just interacting on this platform, can you imagine the exponential learning we could have if we met face to face and learned from each other? And the first year we had 23 people in the room. Next year we had 30 something. And then one year we were in Atlanta in 2019 and it was 38 people and it's limited to 40. So we almost sold out on the 3rd year of the event. And then 2020 happened and we did it in Chicago right before the shutdown. And I had 40 people registered and 20 people in the room because over the course of the 4 days before everyone was supposed to arrive, people had to cancel all over the place. So we did it this year in March in Park City, Utah, and we had 20 people and it was amazing. And the reason I'm shouting out to my spouse is because he has been the ultimate supporter and cheerleader for this event, despite how stressful it's been, despite the ups and downs of it. So he was a total rock star helping me host my guests. And then the people who showed up at this event are just extraordinary. We had my friend Heather Younger, who's building an empire around the themes of caring leadership. And my friend Melissa Hughes, who talks about neuroscience and creativity, and she's just magical. And Neil Hughes, not related to Melissa Hughes, came in all the way from the UK. And he is my big shout out because he manages my podcast. And he has been doing it since December of 2017. So we have over 200 episodes every Tuesday. So that's my shout out. My plug is I just released a course called Discovering Clarity, One Bite at a Time. And speaking of food, it's all based on the idea that dissatisfaction is a hunger. And so we need to feed it. We need to find out why we're dissatisfied in our jobs, in our lives, and identify what will bring us satisfaction. And this course, it's a short course, it's just 5 modules, and it helps people develop clarity around what is satisfying in their lives, what isn't, and how to get more of that satisfaction. And they can find that on elkinsconsulting.com. My podcast is called Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. And that's also the name of my book, which is available on Amazon and all other places. Bookshop.org, if you want to support small local booksellers, bookshop.org. And that book actually has the beginnings of your story portfolio worksheets right in the book. So you can start creating and collecting.
That's excellent. Well, definitely going to put that in the show notes, and definitely love checking out your episodes, and definitely look forward to our collaborations and continuous relationship. This has been great. I'm glad that you did reach out. I think LinkedIn is a great connector, because I think that's how we got connected on LinkedIn as well.
It is.
So shout out to LinkedIn in that point. So listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please support Sarah and all her things, and follow and like and subscribe, buy the book, all that. And also, just encourage you to just, if you need help learn how to tell a good story, reach out to her and get some of that professional help as well. If you like this episode too, please share it with your family members or friends. That's how we elevate this show, as well as give this podcast a like or review on Spotify or Apple. That helps elevate the show. If you have any questions for the podcast and want to leave a voicemail, which I sometimes put in the episodes, you can call the hotline, which is 571-336-6560. That's 571-336-6560. I love hearing voicemails from the listeners. It's always great. And, just keep being positive. So enjoy your day. Thank you so much for supporting us, and we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.